She didn't cry, she didn't run, she simply lay there, her small body covering his, her breath shaking with each passing truck. Luna wasn't just a leopard, she was a sister refusing to let go, even if it killed her. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments? And if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. The mist was thick that morning, clinging to the towering trees like a breath held too long. In the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, early spring had arrived with a hushed solemnity, cool air brushing against bark and leaf. The ground still slick from the night's drizzle. Dew hung on pine needles like tiny ornaments, and somewhere deep in the folds of the forest, the slow rhythm of life stirred. Frank Wallace, a retired park ranger in his early 70s, moved steadily down a narrow trail just off Route 221. His gait was measured, deliberate, one leg dragging slightly behind the other due to a hiking accident he'd had nearly 2 decades ago, broad-shouldered and weathered. Frank was a man carved from the mountain itself. Thick white beard, brown eyes sharp despite age, and a calmness born of countless hours walking alone among trees. Frank wasn't one for chatter, but he greeted the forest every morning like an old friend. He carried a carved walking stick he'd made himself, etched with notches for each year. He had lived alone in his cabin near Boone since his wife passed. Grief had shaped him into a quiet sentinel of the woods, respectful, watchful, and unshaken by most things. But what he saw that morning stilled him where even bears and wolves had failed to do, just ahead, on the gravel shoulder of the trail near a shallow turn. 2 golden shapes lay curled against one another. At first glance, they resembled 2 overgrown house cats, but the dappled pattern on their coats, rosettes, not stripes, was unmistakable. Leopards, juveniles, here. Frank's breath caught, his instincts kicked in before his thoughts could fully form. These were not animals native to the Blue Ridge, not supposed to be. At least, one cub lay motionless, its body limp, side rising shallowly, leg twisted at a painful angle, but the other was very much alive. It was a female, maybe 5 months old. Her fur the color of burnished gold with dark chocolate spots, wet from dew, flecked with tiny leaves. She was crouched protectively over the injured one, her eyes wide, unblinking, fixed on Frank with attention that hummed in the air like a plucked string. She did not move, did not flee. She only pressed her small frame closer to the one beside her, her brother. Frank would later learn, Frank didn't move either. He knew animals, wild ones. He understood fear when he saw it. But this was not just fear, this was resolve. He slowly backed away a few feet, lifted the walkie-talkie from his belt, and radioed for help. Not to the Park Service, but to someone he knew would understand. Dr. Nathan Hale. Nathan was a wildlife veterinarian in his early 40s who had once been a rising academic in San Diego, until tragedy redrew the lines of his life. Tall, lean, with eyes the color of winter rain and hands steady as prayer. Nathan carried the heaviness of a man who had buried a child, his 8-year-old son. Liam had died in a car accident while Nathan was away at a conference on animal cognition. Since then, Nathan had moved east, away from cities and accolades, into the cradle of wilderness, where grief could bleed quietly into purpose. He ran a modest wildlife clinic on the outskirts of Blowing Rock. His patients were usually injured owls, deer hit by passing cars, the occasional bear cub separated from its mother. But nothing could have prepared him for Frank's voice that morning. 2 young leopards. One's down, the other won't leave its side. It's not natural. Nathan, it's something else. Nathan didn't ask questions. He was already pulling on his coat 20 minutes later. His battered white SUV cut through the mist, tires crunching softly on wet gravel, as he parked at the trailhead. The forest had gone oddly quiet, as if it too was holding its breath. Frank pointed silently. Nathan approached slowly, crouching low, a canvas carrier in one hand, thick leather gloves in the other. The air was damp and still. The only movement came from the small, brave figure guarding her sibling with a gaze so steady it almost undid him. She hissed softly as he neared, but didn't strike. Her muscles were taut, eyes flicking between Nathan and the broken body beneath her. She didn't want to fight, but she would. Nathan knelt, his voice soft. "It's okay, girl, I see you. You're not alone." The injured cub whimpered faintly. Nathan gently reached toward him. That's when the cry came. Not a growl, not a snarl, but a sound so raw it scraped something inside Nathan's chest. The female cub, later named Luna, lifted her head and released a keening, desperate sound. It wasn't meant to frighten, it was a plea, help him. Nathan paused, his eyes wet now, steady hands slightly trembling. "I'm going to help him, I promise," he said aloud, more to himself than to her. He worked carefully, cradling the unconscious male, whom he would call River, for the gentle rise and fall of his breath, into the padded carrier. Luna followed with her eyes, took one hesitant step forward, then another, without being asked. She walked into Nathan's arms, pressing her head into the fabric of his coat as if she knew this was the only path to staying beside her brother. Frank let out a slow breath from behind, eyes glinting with something like reverence. As Nathan secured the two cubs in the back of the SUV, Luna curled immediately around River once more, her thin body rising and falling with his, matching him breath for breath. He would carry them to the clinic. He didn't know where they had come from yet, an illegal breeder, perhaps, or a traveling exotic show gone wrong, but none of that mattered now. What mattered was that love had made this young creature stay when every instinct screamed run. What mattered was that she had waited. The clinic was quiet that morning, save for the soft hum of heating vents and the occasional creak of wood settling against the late spring chill. Outside, the air hung thick with dampness. Low-hanging clouds nestled against the slopes of blowing rock. North Carolina, veiling the forest in a muted hush. Inside, the modest structure of pine and stone. Dr. Nathan Hale moved with calm precision through the narrow corridor leading to the recovery room. River, the injured leopard cub, lay curled in a heated enclosure near the back wall. His leg was splinted and wrapped carefully, his breathing shallow but steady. Nathan had stayed up most of the night monitoring him, adjusting fluids, whispering soft reassurances, though he knew the cub couldn't yet hear them. Luna, however, was very much awake and watching. She hadn't moved far since arriving, keeping her body curled tightly against her brother's side, her golden fur, now cleaned of forest debris, gleamed under the soft lamplight, though the muscle tension beneath her skin never eased. Every time Nathan approached the enclosure, Luna lifted her head with wary eyes, issuing a low, guttural growl that rumbled quietly through the room. Not aggressive, not panicked, just a warning. Nathan respected the space she claimed. He kept his movements slow, his voice low, and always met her eyes with steady calm. Still guarding. "Huh," he murmured as he knelt to check the IV line attached to River's paw. "You're a good sister, Luna. I see that." He didn't expect her to understand, but sometimes words helped build the bridge, the moment his hand brushed River's bandage. Luna's growl deepened. Nathan didn't flinch. Instead, he paused and sat back on his heels, keeping eye contact. I'm not here to hurt him. You'll see. For a while. Luna didn't react, but she didn't lash out either. It was progress. Later that morning, the front bell of the clinic jingled, soft and hesitant. Emily Bennett stepped in, her frame thin beneath a green windbreaker. Auburn hair pulled into a loose braid that draped over one shoulder. In her early 30s. Emily had the air of someone constantly navigating between worry and grace. She glanced around the small lobby before giving a gentle nod to the receptionist. Trailing closely behind her was Clara, 10 years old, her small frame wrapped in a beige cardigan 2 sizes too big. She walked without a sound, her sneakers barely making contact with the linoleum floor. Her long blonde hair fell over her face like a curtain, shielding the world from seeing too much. Her hands were buried deep in her sleeves, fingers twisting the fabric in silent rhythm. Nathan emerged from the back, wiping his hands on a towel. Emily, he greeted. Clara. Clara didn't look up. Thank you again for letting us come, Emily said softly. The therapist said exposure might help, even if she just sits nearby. Of course. Nathan replied, There's no pressure. She's welcome to stay as long as she likes. He led them down the corridor toward the observation bay, through a wide glass panel. Luna and River were visible inside their enclosure. Luna was awake, her ears perked, eyes fixed on the new presence at the doorway. Clara stood a step behind her mother, hesitant. She's been like this since the accident, Emily murmured, more to herself than anyone else. No words, not even to me. Nathan crouched beside the girl. Careful not to crowd her. She doesn't speak either, he said, gesturing toward Luna, but she's been trying to tell me something all the same. Clara blinked slowly, her gaze inching toward the glass. Nathan stepped back. Would you like to sit here for a while? Clara made no sound but moved forward, drawn like gravity. She stood at the edge of the glass, staring in. Luna stared back. A long moment passed, then another, and then something subtle changed. Clara raised one hand slowly, almost timidly, and placed her palm gently on the window. Luna didn't move, but her breathing slowed. The growl that had been rumbling earlier faded into silence. Then, so quietly that only Emily and Nathan heard it, Clara made a sound. It wasn't a word, more like a murmur. Just breath formed into tone, soft, intentional. It wasn't for Nathan, it wasn't for her mother, it was for Luna. Emily turned away, one hand covering her mouth. Nathan stood beside her, eyes fixed on the girl, on the connection forming, not through speech or gesture, but something deeper, something ancient. Across the glass, Luna blinked once, her body relaxed, just slightly, for the first time since arriving. She lowered her head without tension and rested her chin gently on River's back. And Clara stayed there, her small hand pressed against the glass, eyes wide, not afraid, but quietly understood. A bond had begun. The third morning began with the softest shift. So small. Nathan almost missed it. The clinic, as always, was hushed at sunrise, wrapped in that thin veil of stillness that only rural places seem to know. Birds stirred restlessly in the pines outside, and dew clung to the window panes like breath held overnight. Inside the recovery room, a machine beeped softly. River's chest rose in slow, steady rhythm. Luna was awake, as she often was before the humans. She had not moved from her curled position next to her brother. one paw flung lightly over his ribs. Her eyes were half-lidded but alert, still trained on Nathan each time he entered the room. Nathan knelt slowly. His routine, now second nature. He adjusted the fluids, checked the splint, examined the sutures. His voice stayed low, his movements measured. Luna didn't growl anymore, but her eyes never left his hands. Then it happened. River stirred. It was just a twitch, a flex of his paw, a soft shift of weight. Nathan froze. Luna's ears perked instantly. The young leopard's nostrils flared as she nosed his neck and chest with rapid urgency. River gave a short, weak exhale, and then his eyelids fluttered. Golden brown eyes cracked open, glassy and uncertain, blinking in the lamplight. He tried to lift his head, but Nathan gently placed a hand near his flank. "Easy," he whispered. "You're safe now." Luna pressed her face into River's shoulder. She let out a low, vibrating purr, deep and warm like the sound of running water over stone. River didn't speak in any way a human might understand, but his eyes met hers, and something passed between them. Memory. Perhaps recognition. A sigh of relief without words. Nathan stayed a moment longer, just watching. Later that afternoon, Clara arrived. Her steps were the same, quiet, cautious, but her presence carried a different weight now. She no longer hesitated at the threshold of the recovery room. She walked straight to the glass and sat cross-legged on the floor, a sketch pad clutched in one hand. Her mother, Emily, gave Nathan a small nod and stepped back to the front room. Trusting the silence between them all to do more than therapy ever could. Clara's drawing that day was different. Gone were the lonely outlines and pale colors. Today's page held deep green trees, soft golden fur, and two spotted bodies curled close together under a canopy of stars. The perspective was odd, viewed as though the artist herself were watching from behind the trees, a witness rather than a participant, but it was rich with emotion. Even in its childlike execution. Nathan crouched beside her but didn't speak. Clara kept drawing, her small hands moving slowly, rhythmically, when she paused. She looked through the glass. River was awake again. Head lifted now, resting on his uninjured leg. Luna stayed pressed beside him, but her ears flicked toward Clara for a moment. The three of them were joined in a silent, invisible thread, two creatures who had nearly lost everything, and one child who understood exactly what that meant. Nathan had begun to notice the changes in Clara. Though she hadn't spoken a full word, she now made sounds, small things, like whispers she didn't realize had left her throat. She hummed sometimes, especially when she drew, and she always murmured something just above breath, whenever Luna locked eyes with her. "Do you think she's speaking to the leopard?" Emily asked one afternoon, her voice low with awe. "I think," Nathan said, "they're speaking to each other." The next day, a new character entered their rhythm. Jake Harper, Nathan's assistant, returned from a short trip to visit his sister in Asheville, just 24. Jake had a disheveled charm, always a little scruffy, with sandy hair that refused to stay in place and sleeves rolled up past his elbows, a veterinary student before pausing school due to financial strain. Jake had been working with Nathan for a year and brought a gentleness to his work that animals responded to almost immediately. He stepped into the recovery room and blinked. "She's sitting here now?" he asked, nodding toward Clara. "She's part of the process." Nathan replied, "You'll see." Jake crouched beside Nathan, adjusting the IV bag. He glanced at Luna, who watched him warily. "Still doesn't like new people." "Huh. Not yet." Jake didn't press. He moved with calm competence, replacing a few dressings and checking vitals. River stayed still, but his eyes remained open, tracking the quiet boy who had helped bring him this far. By the end of the week, Clara had started bringing colored pencils with her. She created entire series of sketches. Luna curled around River, blinking sleepily as Clara watched. Even Nathan crouched beside them, drawn in, careful. Warm tones. She never offered them aloud, but she left them behind every day. And Nathan pinned them to a corkboard in his office, each picture more expressive than any conversation. One afternoon, as the light faded golden through the windows, Clara sat closer than usual, almost pressed to the glass. Luna had shifted so that her side leaned against the panel, her head tilted toward Clara. There was no barrier in their minds anymore. It was only the glass now, and even that seemed less like separation and more like understanding. Clara whispered something, a quiet sound shaped in longing. Nathan didn't catch the word, but Luna responded. Her tail flicked once, gently, her eyes closed, then opened again, slow and deliberate, the kind of blink that said, "I see you. I know you're here." That night, after they left, Nathan returned to the enclosure to find Luna curled beside River, both of them sleeping, their bodies forming a mirrored arc like a question mark and its answer, and he understood, finally, what was unfolding before him. Not just recovery, but connection. Not just survival, but healing. The wind carried a new song that morning. It slipped between the trees with a different rhythm, like something had turned in the earth overnight. At the clinic on the outskirts of Blowing Rock, Nathan Hale stood at the back doorway, a steaming mug of coffee warming his hands, watching the treetops sway. Spring was folding into summer. The air smelled of fresh pine, new growth, and something more subtle, like release, inside the recovery room. River had done the impossible. He was standing, wobbly, hesitant, favoring his splinted leg, but standing nonetheless. His body was lean, his muscles still underdeveloped from weeks of rest, but his spine was upright, tail flicking slightly, eyes focused on the open space of the enclosure. Luna had been the one to coax him up. She had risen first, taken a few careful steps toward the corner, and then turned back, eyes wide, patient. River had hesitated. Then, like the flick of a candle catching wind, he pushed his weight up, and now, here they were, both cubs upright for the first time since that day on the roadside. Nathan watched from a distance. He didn't enter the enclosure anymore, not unless he had to. Luna's trust was deepening, but still cautious, and he didn't want to disturb the delicate ground they'd gained. He turned toward the office as Jake entered, his usual tousled look now paired with a light green bandana that covered his messy hair. "They're up?" he asked, wide-eyed. "They are," Nathan said, smiling faintly. "First time." Jake grinned. "I'd say it's time to start planning for what comes next." Nathan didn't respond right away. That question, what comes next, had haunted him for days. Releasing them back into the wild was the natural goal. That was the mission. But every instinct in him hesitated. River still had a limp. Luna had bonded, not just with her brother, but with Clara. And they were no longer feral in the way wild animals needed to be. Their fear had softened, reshaped into understanding. And understanding, in the wilderness, could mean danger that afternoon. Clara returned with her usual quiet steps. She carried a rolled drawing clutched to her chest with both arms, her blonde hair tied back for the first time in a loose braid. Nathan noticed the change, small but deliberate. Clara was beginning to re-enter the world. She didn't speak, but when she handed the drawing to Nathan, Her eyes stayed fixed on his. He unrolled the paper. It was a wide, colorful image, an open forest clearing enclosed by a tall, woven fence. Inside were 2 spotted leopards lying beneath a tree. A small wooden shelter nearby, off in the corner, behind a pane of glass, was a figure of a child with long hair, watching quietly, holding a pencil in one hand. In the bottom corner of the paper, Clara had written a single word in blocky, uneven letters. Home. Nathan's hands tightened around the page. It wasn't just a wish. It was a plan. That night, after Emily and Clara had gone home, Nathan sat at his desk with the lights low, the drawing spread in front of him and an old map of his property pinned beside it. Behind the clinic stretched 10 acres of fenced, unused land, once meant for rehabilitation overflow but never developed, mostly overgrown brush, patches of thinned woodland, and one abandoned tool shed. He hadn't stepped back there in nearly a year, not since the morning he scattered Liam's ashes among the birches. But now, something was pulling him toward that space again. The next morning, he took Jake with him to walk the land. The sky was clear, birds high and bright, and the path behind the clinic had grown soft with moss and tangled roots. They walked in silence until they reached the clearing that sat like a forgotten pocket of quiet. Jake turned slowly. "You really think they could live here with work?" Nathan replied, "Shelter, reinforcement, maybe a few tree platforms. A stream runs through the east side. Fresh water won't be an issue. And safety, I'll double the fence, cameras, maybe motion alarms for the gate." Jake looked over at his mentor, surprised by the certainty in his voice. "What changed your mind?" Nathan hesitated, then smiled faintly. "A child who doesn't speak told me what they needed. Sometimes that's all the clarity a man gets." The next week passed in a storm of effort. Jake called in favors from former classmates and locals, mostly carpenters, volunteers, even a retired wildlife handler named Ed Greer, a thick-set man in his 60s with calloused hands and a booming laugh. Ed was gruff but efficient, built like an ox, and wore a baseball cap that read "God's Zoo." He used to run enclosures for rescued mountain lions in Colorado before retiring to North Carolina to be near his grandchildren. "These cats are lucky," Ed said, nailing support beams into the fencing. "Most don't get second chances, or third. Neither do most people." Nathan murmured. Clara came each afternoon to sit on a stump outside the new perimeter, sketching everything, the workers, the trees, Luna watching through the clinic window. She never spoke, but sometimes she'd hum softly, and always. Luna would lift her head when she arrived, eyes following her from behind the glass as if counting the days. On the 10th day, the habitat was finished. There were 3 shaded dens, a wide stretch of undergrowth, low branches to climb, and even a repurposed swing set Clara had insisted they keep from the back lot, now wrapped in rope and converted into a climbing frame. Nathan waited until sunset to bring the cubs out. He carried River gently in a padded crate, Luna walking beside him under Jake's cautious watch, the moment the gate opened and the forest air swept in. Luna paused, her ears twitched. River growled softly, confused. Nathan set the crate down and opened the door. Luna stepped in first. She turned, just once, to look back at Clara standing behind the glass barrier outside the enclosure. Then she chirped, a soft, high-pitched call, and River, slowly, limped after her, together. They vanished into the green. The first frost had come quietly in the night. By morning, the edges of the grass in the leopard habitat sparkled like silver threads under the rising sun. The birch trees behind the enclosure had lost most of their leaves, revealing pale trunks that shimmered like bones beneath the winter light. The swing Clara had once insisted on keeping in the enclosure now swayed gently in the breeze. Its ropes stiff with cold, its wooden seat dusted with frost. Clara stood just outside the reinforced viewing glass, her breath fogging the surface. She was 12 now, taller, her features more defined, but her eyes held the same steady stillness. The trauma that had once muted her had softened, reshaped into something patient and reflective. She spoke rarely, but she spoke mostly when it mattered. Today, something in the air made her uneasy. Luna lay curled in the far corner of the enclosure, her golden coat thicker now. Dusted in winter's early touch, River was beside her. His body larger but still slightly thinner. His limp permanent but unobtrusive. The two had grown into sleek, powerful adults, true leopards in every way but one. They had never left, though the enclosure remained open to the wider woods beyond. Though the gate to the rehabilitation corridor was lifted every season to test their instincts. They always returned, first for food, then for habit, then for something less explainable. They were wild, yes, but they had chosen their wildness near humans. Nathan stood beside Clara, his jacket zipped to the chin, gray in his beard now more visible in the morning light. He held a thermos of coffee, but hadn't touched it yet. "You feel it too?" he asked softly. Clara nodded. Nathan tilted his head toward the tree line. "Something's watching. Stay here." He moved slowly toward the enclosure's outer gate, where Ed Greer, the old sanctuary builder who now maintained the fencing, was already examining the perimeter. Ed was bundled in flannel and denim, his breath coming in visible bursts as he knelt near a patch of disturbed earth. "Something dug under here," he muttered. "Fresh prints, too, bigger than a fox." Nathan crouched beside him. The tracks were odd, wider than a coyote's, with deeper claws. "You think it's a stray dog?" Ed grunted. "If it is, it's one with a bad attitude." They reinforced the opening, then split off to check the camera footage in the maintenance shed nearby. The grainy video showed a blurry figure slinking through the underbrush just after dawn, low to the ground, stocky, mottled in color, a hyena. Nathan stared at the screen. "Disbelieving hyena," he whispered. "There's no way. Not native. Could have been released by someone." Ed replied, "Exotic pet trade. Plenty of idiots still out there." Nathan was already moving. Clara's still near the enclosure, back at the glass wall. Clara stood frozen. Not in fear, but in focus. She was staring at a dark blur near the southern edge of the clearing. The hyena had emerged, low-slung, with patchy gray fur and a muscular, loping gait. Its ears flicked as it crept forward. River hadn't noticed yet. He was still resting near the swing, but Luna had. She stood suddenly, her head lifting high, body tense. She moved forward with slow, controlled steps until she stood between the intruder and her brother. Her body blocked River completely. Her tail lashed once, and then she lowered her head and hissed, not a snarl, a scream. It was raw and unnatural, the kind of sound that tore through bone, that sent birds flying from trees. Clara pressed her hand against the glass. "Luna," she whispered. The hyena halted but didn't retreat. It stepped sideways. Testing. Luna crouched lower, fur bristling. She didn't blink. She didn't run. Nathan burst through the far gate with a tranquilizer rifle. Ed followed, wielding nothing but a large metal rod. Clara didn't move. She couldn't. The hyena took another step forward, and Luna pounced. She didn't land the attack. She didn't need to. Her body arched midair, paws flared, and her scream came again, this time with fury. The hyena flinched, turned, and fled, vanishing back into the forest through the same gap it had crawled in from. Luna gave chase for only a few strides, then circled back, checking River with urgent nudges. He had risen by then, shaken but unharmed, by the time Nathan reached them. Luna was standing tall, her sides heaving, her golden eyes locked on his, not as a threat but as if she was saying, "I had to do it." Nathan lowered the rifle. "You did, Clara," from behind the glass. Exhaled for the first time in minutes. That evening, Nathan walked the perimeter again, double-checking repairs with Ed. They both said little, still rattled by the morning's intrusion. But the silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was reverent. "Guess she's not just a leopard," Ed muttered finally. "No," Nathan said, "she's something more. Years passed. The seasons shifted from frost to bloom, from storm to stillness. River's limp never faded, but his stride grew steady. Luna remained his silent sentinel. Even as they aged, they never left the land, never tried to escape. Every winter, they returned to the same shelter, curled beside each other like the first day Nathan had found them. And Clara found her voice. She began to write, at first. Simple journal entries, then essays, then a full manuscript, part memoir, part reflection, part wild fable. It was published when she turned 18, The Ones Who Waited. A story of grief, of survival, of the two leopards who taught her what love looked like when words had left her. She visited the sanctuary every week. Now, as a young woman with steady speech and quiet conviction, children came from nearby towns to hear her speak. Researchers came to observe Luna and River, but none of them truly understood, because they hadn't seen that first scream, that first act of choosing to stay, to protect, to love beyond instinct. One evening, just before dusk, Clara stood beside the enclosure once more. Luna lay in the grass, her head resting across River's back. The light painted their fur in gold. Nathan came to stand beside her. His hair had gone fully gray. His hands ached more in winter. "They've always returned here." Clara whispered, "Yes." Why, Nathan smiled softly. "Because this is where they were seen." Clara nodded. She understood. The light faded, but the leopards didn't move. They were still as stone, breathing in unison, and somewhere deep in the woods, where wind once carried sorrow. The trees now held a kind of sacred quiet, in a world where nature often seems unforgiving. Luna and River reminded us that miracles do not always roar. They sometimes whisper. Sometimes they come in the form of a sister who refuses to leave her brother's side. A child who finds her voice not through words but through love. Or a community that dares to build a sanctuary instead of walking away. We believe love is only human. But God shows us, again and again, that His love runs through all living things, beast and child, silence and suffering, brokenness and healing. Luna did not protect River because of instinct alone. She stayed because she was chosen to, perhaps by something greater than biology. And maybe that's what faith looks like. Choosing to stay, choosing to guard, choosing to believe in light even when surrounded by darkness. In your own life, you may be watching over someone, or perhaps someone is silently watching over you. Don't miss the quiet miracle. Don't forget what the world sees as broken. God may be shaping for something far more beautiful. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to comment, Amen, if you believe God speaks through love, loyalty, and second chances. Share this story to remind someone that hope is real. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss more powerful, soul-healing stories, and pray with us that every wounded soul finds a Luna, a Clara, or a home like theirs. May God bless you and everyone you love.